It was interesting yesterday when people were talking about all their, the books and the key issue with a really successful book always seemed to be the title and these nice, snappy one-word titles. Well, this is a UN report. The title is quite long. It goes 3 lines. And I think if you read the title, it's called A New Global Partnership, Eradicate Poverty and Transform Economies Through Sustainable Development, just rolls off the tongue. You see pretty much immediately that this is actually very much a negotiated product. It has this mix of having to have a little bit of technical substance. These words, eradicate poverty, do actually require some action, so we've got to figure out exactly what it means. But at the end of the day, it's also a negotiation. We only had to negotiate amongst 27 panel members. If you think that negotiations become exponentially more complex with the number of people, I am grateful that I am not involved in the 193 member country negotiations. So I wanted to focus on actually the one of the big issues that the panel faced, which was the issue of how does one pitch a development agenda post-2015? Do you take it as, do you try to make it something which is relatively focused, quite achievable, simple, easy to communicate, which is how I would describe the Millennium Development Goals, but risks missing a great deal of what we think of as development? Or do you try to go broad and say, actually, we want to just address development? And remember, the UN used to have decades of development. You know, the first development decade was in the 1960s and other things where one didn't really need to specify what development was. You just wanted to have development. Those weren't terribly successful. So one of the big questions was, exactly how do we do this balance? And perhaps not surprisingly, we came to the conclusion that we wanted to do both. So what you'll see in the panel report at the end of the day is a description that says we want to be really focused. And so in the vision and the objective of the panel report, you will see the big goal, which is to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030, become the first generation in history that can really realistically think about achieving that. But at the same time, to do so, as we say in the report, in the context of sustained prosperity, meaning you can't just do that and leave the whole rest of the development enterprise and ignore it. It has to be done at the same time. All of this in the context of sustainable development, meaning development has to be thought of as something much broader than just economic prosperity. It has to be thought of in terms of the environmental and social dimensions that Mr. Jeremic mentioned, and that it should be irreversible. So if you have gains in poverty, they should be, as best one can, irreversible. Meaning that you ought to pay some attention to things like safety nets, to things like the concept of resilience. And, we all know that things are changing very quickly in the world. And we also, I think, know that poverty is not something which is transient. Sendil talked about this yesterday. Incomes at the bottom of the pyramid are actually very volatile. Some years people can be classified as non-poor if you use an income definition, and then the next year they might be classified as poor, and more or less we figure that in every 3 years there's a 30% chance of your losing at least half of your income. So you can take it from there about probabilities of being poor. So I would say that where we ended up is you can't define development without talking about extreme poverty. And I'll come to, so it is it's a necessary condition to talk about extreme poverty when you talk about development, but it's by no means a sufficient condition. And you also need to talk about all this other range of things. So, why did we decide that we needed to have this kind of balance? I'd say the first reason is that one needs to have a relatively comprehensive agenda because the issues of eradicating poverty are so closely intertwined with all kinds of other issues. And principally, the big place where this is all coming together is bringing together the poverty agenda and the environmental agenda. And to be honest, right now in the world today, these are totally different communities internationally. They run different processes, different people show up at the conferences, they have different financing streams, and they almost never talk to each other except in think tanks and universities. So in governments, they don't really talk to each other. And it's become a bit of a problem because these different communities now also have quite different cultures. So the culture on the environmental side is a culture of treaties, it's a culture of obligations, it's a culture of enforcement, and the culture on the development side is a culture really of support, of mutual assistance, and very much something which is country-led and very much something which is voluntary rather than mandatory. Bring them together is necessary because half of the people living in poverty actually depend on natural assets, natural resource assets, for half of their income. And a lot of that is deteriorating. It's deteriorating because of population pressures on ecological hotspots. It's deteriorating because of climate change, which in some parts of the world is generating changes in weather. Obviously, people living in poverty are particularly dependent on agriculture for a great deal of their support. If you don't solve the issues of climate change and environmental degradation in many of the hotspots of the world, it will not be possible to eradicate extreme poverty, full stop. So you need to bring these agendas together. Second point, the old development agenda of the MDGs was essentially a bargain about aid from rich countries in exchange for a focus on core poverty eradication measures in developing countries. That basic bargain is no longer interesting and useful in today's world. And there are many reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is there are real limitations on the amount of aid that can be expected in the future. This is no longer an agenda about aid and what aid can do. This has got to be an agenda which goes well beyond aid and into the range of other things which are really important for advanced countries to do in order to get poverty reduction. And that range of things encompasses everything from energy efficiency and greater sustainability, to food security, to tax avoidance, illicit capital flows, control of corruption. It goes into peacekeeping and personal safety. It goes into the subsidization of particularly of agricultural products and what can be done there. So we know migration policies. We know that there are these range of other instruments which are probably as important, if not way more important, for development than aid. So one needs to bring all of those other instruments to bear, including, I would say, the instrument of knowledge exchange, knowledge expansion, and building science in developing countries. And then finally, I think that the reason for going broad is because business as usual, if you like, wasn't really going to do the trick. We've had extraordinary gains in poverty reduction, but if you want to actually eradicate poverty by 2030 in the many dimensions in which it expresses itself, we can't do it at the pace at which we're going now, especially considering the fact that the pace is likely to slow as you try to reach more and more marginalized communities. So how do you change that, that notion of business as usual? One of the ways you do it is by broadening the agenda. The other advantage, I think, of broadening the agenda is you get many, many more stakeholders. You have to, at the end of the day, build a coalition of support for this agenda. The development enterprise, if you will, has moved out of the space of a few development professionals. It's moved out of the technical space into the political space. First, you saw big movements of people organized through civil society organizations that came into this space. Now you're starting to see business coming into this space. Business is interested in development not as corporate social responsibility, but as part of their core business strategies because, as we've heard, this is where business is growing. This is where the new markets are. And those new markets are not just at the bottom of the pyramid. Those new markets are in the emerging middle class. If you're going to have a ladder, it's quite useful to have a ladder which has rungs all the way up, not just rungs at the very bottom and then a big empty space. So it's great that business is coming into development. And at the end of the day, there are many things that business will bring that will actually move development. All the learning, the organizational capabilities that Ricardo is talking about, most of that is happening actually within businesses and within firms. So we need to bring them into this space. All of these are reasons for going broad. Then, why do you have to go narrow? Why is it so important that you keep a focus on eradicating extreme poverty at the same time? And there, I think, the phrase we used in the report broke it down into three quite simple arguments. It's the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, and it's a necessary thing to do. So the right thing to do. We live in a world where the level of inequality between the richest and the poorest is larger than it's been at any time in history, and it's getting larger, just in terms of a pure distribution. There are many people who, within their own country, subscribe to the Rawlsian approach that one way to judge societies is by the way in which they treat the most disadvantaged people in society. And the same kind of idea can be taken for the world as a whole. So there are many things in here that are simple moral statements about how we expect people to be able to live and survive in a world which today is upwards of $70 trillion, an average income of $10,000 a head, and we still have so many people living on less than $1.25 a day, which was the definition of extreme poverty. So, that real tail of the distribution. So it's the right thing to do. The smart thing to do. All of the examples in the report about interventions to eradicate poverty have rates of return which are at least double digit and sometimes very high double digits. And Sendhil gave an extraordinary presentation yesterday about the impact of poverty on people's cognitive development. One could infer from that if you get people out of poverty, the returns are actually dramatic, because it's not just getting them out of poverty, it is also all the things that they will be able to do because now they can start to fulfill their own potential. So we have 1 billion people in the world who live below $1.25 a day, roughly speaking. If you can improve all of their IQs by 9 points, think of the extraordinary things that they might be able to accomplish. So I think across the board there is this sense that you've got really high rates of return to dealing with some of these basic issues. And then finally, the necessary thing to do, it's necessary because if we don't solve the problem of poverty, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to solve any of the other global problems like climate change and environmental degradation. Poor people, there's slash and burn agriculture, there's the way in which soil is being eroded and techniques like that. There's encroachment of population in hotspots. There are all kinds of reasons why poor people themselves are actually contributing to problems in climate change, and it would be so easy, it's much easier, frankly, to have a win-win solution which helps people to get out of poverty and improves the climate, rather than thinking about how we're going to have, let's say, solar cells to power all of New York, which turns out to be quite expensive and quite complicated to do. So let me close there by just trying to assert that you can't get away from this question of whether to go narrow and focused or whether to go broad. I think you have to do both, but you've got to do both in a smart way. If you just go broad, you will lose the focus on poverty. If you just look at poverty, you won't be successful because you won't have that broader development. Thank you.